Alright, in this lecture we will look at array traversal in case of two-dimensional array. We know from previous lectures that traversing means visiting all cells of array over here. There are many different purposes for doing this. It can be printing all elements of array one by one or updating them one by one. So how do we traverse in a two-dimensional array? It's different than one-dimensional array because here we need to traverse through rows and columns. So we will create a loop which will start visit from first row, then second row, and then the third row. Now in this case, the traversing will work like this. So it will start from the first cell of the first row, and then printing out this one to the console, then it continues to the second cell of the first row, and printing out to the console, then it continues to the third cell of the first row, it continues like this, and then it continues to the fourth cell of this first row, and after finishing first row, it continues to the second row. Now here again it's visiting one by one elements and printing out their values. Now then after finishing second row it continues to the third row. Then it visits all elements of this row also and printing out the values. Basically the logic is like this. First we are visiting all elements of the first row, then we are visiting all elements of the second row, then we are visiting all elements of the third row. So this means that traversing in two-dimensional array is row by row. Now based on this logic, let's see how can we create our method using Java. Now here, one more time, inside two-dimensional class that we created in our previous lectures, I'm going to declare a new method which will be called traverse to the array. Now in this case, it's going to be like this. Public void traverse to the array. This function will not take any parameter because in this case we have our array declared over here, so we are going to visit all elements of this array over here. Now in this case, inside this function, the first thing that I'm going to do, I'm going to create a loop which is looping through all rows of this array over here. For loop is going to be like this. Int row starts from the value of 0, then it continues until the length of array. Now in this case, the length of array, in case of two-dimensional array, returns the number of rows in the arrays. So in this case, row is less than arr.length because row starts from 0, so we don't have to put equal sign over here, so we will put row less than arr length. Then this will be increased by 1 in each step. Then inside this loop, we need to create another loop which will traverse through the columns of the two-dimensional array. So in this case it's going to be like this. For int column starts from 0, then we need to find the number of columns. So if we put arr with the square brackets 0 and length, it's going to return us the number of columns in two-dimensional array. So it's going to be something like this. Arr with square brackets 0 dot length. So in this case it returns the number of columns in the two-dimensional array, and the column will be increased by 1 in each step. Now inside this loop we are going to print out the value of cell, because what we said, when we are doing traversing, we are visiting all elements of two-dimensional array and printing them to the console. So I'm going to print them to the console like this. So here we are going to access the element of row, and the column will be like this. Then here I'm going to put plus with the space between them because I want to put a space between the elements. Then outside this loop, which is looping through the columns, I'm going to just put println function over here to put the elements row by row. So here, after visiting each row, it's going to print out elements to the next line, so it will show us as row by row. So you will see it in the practice now. So I'm going to put it println over here, and that's it. So with this we have finished our method. Basically what we are doing over here is we are starting from the row and the columns. So first loop is visiting all rows, and the second loop is for visiting the columns. So then, as we said before, traversing in two-dimensional array starts from the row. That's why the outer loop is the row. So we are visiting the first row, then the second row, then the third row, and it continues like this. Now let's see how this is working in practice. So in practice, we have created our two-dimensional array like this. So it has 3 rows and 3 columns. So I have inserted some elements to some values of the columns. So in this case, we are inserting first column and first row. Then in this case we are inserting first row and the second column. Then in this case second row and first column, and third row in the first column. Now then I'm going to call traverse to the array method. So to see which elements is going to be printed out to the console. Now let's run our code. Now you see that first it prints out for the value successfully inserted message. So we have inserted 4 elements over here. Then it's printing out the values of cell. Now we said that first row and first column value is 10. So we have inserted over here. Then first row and second column is 20. Then the third value is minus this number over here. This is minus 2 to the power of 31 because this is the minimum integer value in Java. So as you remember, when we are creating our two-dimensional class over here, we have created constructed method here, which is setting all elements to the minimum integer value. So that's why these values comes from here. So we have default values like this. So when we are traversing the array, it's printing out these default values also. And the other elements that we have inserted over here, it gets printed over here. Now here you see that first we are visiting first row, then the second row and the third row. So everything works the way that we want over here. Now let's see what's the time and space complexity for this method over here. So as always, we'll start from the first line of code. So in the first line of code, we have loop over here. So if the number of rows in the two-dimensional array is n, so this code will take n time complexity. Now then we are continuing to the next loop. So in the next loop, we have a loop which loops through the columns. So if the number of columns is n, then in this case, this loop over here will take n time complexity. Now then we are accessing the element of array and printing out to the console. So this will take O1 time complexity, and this println also will take O1 time complexity. Now if we combine all these complexities over here, we are getting OMN time complexity, because in this case, for each row, we are traversing all columns of the array. So in this case, for each that we are doing this. So in this case, the time complexity will be with multiplication. So we are multiplying these complexities over here. We are getting OMN time complexity. Now the space complexity is O1 because in this case, an additional memory is not required to perform this operation. So here we are just visiting all elements and printing out to the console. So that's why the space complexity will be O1. Now with this, we have come to the end of this lecture. So hopefully everything is clear about traversing two-dimensional array.